I mean, with all that's going on and just so many people, we have a lot of people that are just sick with, colds and whatnot. And of course, a lot with some of our elderly folks and others that are, taking the precautions. And the elders, as Tim had given the announcement this morning, that as we've reached out to the congregation, and we're glad to see everyone and appreciate those that, even if they do have a little sniffles or problems, to, I think it is advisable that we're doing. But I got to thinking, and there's a good number of us here tonight that are not supposed to be here by order of the governor. And if you saw that this afternoon, but anyway, my mother-in-law said I'll listen to him anyway, but that's another issue. But it's great to have you, and it's a great day too, especially in reference, appreciate what Kyle said in the prayer, in the baptism of Valeria this morning, and been studying with Arturo and Valeria for a number of weeks now. And as I said this morning, that Arturo has been a Christian for some time and from a family, very faithful Christians down in the San Diego area. And Valeria, she has has had through her lifetime, as you can imagine, a Catholic background. But by influence of Arturo and coming to services, and they've been coming very consistently since sometime before Thanksgiving, and for some time now. And we've been going through the What Shall I Believe series. And I want to tell you, I've seen this and I've taught that material and been in these classes literally hundreds of times. And she is a question asker, and that is good. That is good. And so it's been very, very, but a positive thing. And the other thing I want to say too, because you may have thought that, well, because of these studies and what her decision, that I did the sermon, what I did this morning, because of that decision. I had that sermon done and that part of the bulletin done on Wednesday. We didn't have our class till Friday. It was so great that it just happened to turn out, not that I wouldn't have her or anybody else in mind who's looking at the gospel, dealing with that particular sermon, but and when she told us on Friday, and I thought we might baptize her Friday evening or Friday afternoon, she says, no, I want to do it on Sunday morning when we come. And I said, well, I'll tell you one thing, it's going to work really well with the sermon that I'm preaching on Sunday morning. And so that was awesome as well. Anyway, great to have you here. We do have a visitor with us tonight. We have a lot of visitors, but Gwen, good to have you with us. And she lives down in Oceano, had been down in the Santa Maria area, and in fact were you baptized down in Lincoln and Tunnel where Don Smith is? Yeah, and then but has moved up to Oceano and attends Grover where Rob Redden is. And but they're not meeting tonight, and so she's able to come and worship with us tonight because of her work schedule. Good to have you with us. I appreciate so much what Tim did this past Wednesday night, and not that I felt that I needed to expand on anything that Tim did Wednesday night, as he kind of dealt with the whole thing that's going on with COVID-19 and dealt with actually the text of Matthew 6. If you remember, those that were here, we had a good group here. And Matthew 6, and that was your main text, and you dealt with those thoughts. And I had that entire thing read, and I thank Brian for doing that last minute. Paul O'Connor was supposed to be a reader, but he's got laryngitis, and so he's stayed in as he should. And I forgot that, I didn't get a reader, and so I asked Brian to do it last minute. And I said something back to the bulletin, Brian. He goes, okay. But anyway, but there does appear to be plenty of stress in our society today, without question. And we know that so much of it revolves around the COVID-19 virus. And people are concerned about a lot of things. First and foremost, obviously, health. We want to be healthy. We want our families to be healthy, our children to be healthy. I was thinking about that. We just had a great amount of young children here this morning, and you think of this and you think you want them to grow up in a healthy world, and so many of them are so little and young that they don't even realize what's going on. And hopefully we try to insulate them to a certain way so that they don't feel the stress that we may be feeling. I think that's important. We're concerned about our elderly members and certainly our shut-ins and so forth. And you want to talk about something that's very interesting And Victoria Weiss, who is one of our shut-ins, and yet she sent Vicky a text message about 4 o'clock this morning. And which I heard it go off, and Vicky then read it when she woke up. But Victoria wanted to know what we're doing for services, because she has had a little bit of improvement, as we announced before, and she thought about coming to church services today. Now, we know with her situation that it's probably advisable for her to get a little more healthy, although she's doing a little better. But she was concerned about everybody else as well, what's going on and how are people doing. So we're concerned about that. We're concerned, I guess, about the stock market. We're concerned about the economy. We're concerned about how our lives have been changed. Cancellation of numerous events. People that have already in this congregation have changed plans, that we're going to be going on trips, going on cruises, doing this and the other thing. I don't know if I'm doing a gospel meeting in May up in Salem, Oregon or not. We'll see how that turns out. I'm kind of even doubtful if I am going to go to South Africa and Zimbabwe again this year. Just not sure. And that's very much up in the air. It's not until the end of July. But still, you look at these things, and there's a possibility that won't happen. A lot of plans have been changed. Last week, it was just because there was a suspension of the NBA. There were a few people in this congregation, just like the world is coming to an end. But now no March Madness. What is that all about? I told Tim, doesn't bother me a bit. I received a text message from Annette, and Annette says, my world as I know it has come to an end. They've closed Disneyland. And so I don't mean to be flippant about it, but we look at all these kind of trickle down, domino effect, all of these correlations that are taking place. And the shortage of toilet paper, for crying out loud. But it's also brought out, what in the world? I don't want to go there. But you think about it, with the stress and all that's going on, we also see that it brings out the worst of people too, doesn't it? It happens. People that have become very selfish, very self-centered, hoarding and all those kinds of things. And seemingly not really interested about the needs of others. That people that just want to get their regular daily or weekly needs, but now can't because somebody's decided to just empty that shelf. Okay. And then on top of all of that, it's a presidential election year, and people are going crazy no matter what one's brand of politics might be. I think that 2020 is going to be a memorable year. And one of the things of which is going to be very memorable is, again, because of this, what we are experiencing right now. But there are good things. There are highlights. And that's what Jesus is dealing with. And there are highlights. I'm going to tell you, we watched somebody baptized into Christ that was not going to be afraid. And when she was standing there by the way, there and Vicky was with her. And I thought she was cold because she was trembling. And I said, are you cold? She said, no, I'm nervous. Bless her heart. But the courage, and we're not supposed to be touching each other. And I said, well, I kind of got to do that in order to baptize you, Larry. No, that's fine. That's a highlight. Another highlight. Matt Hugh was with us for a while, right? And he may be with us for a little bit longer than even originally anticipated, because this is going all over the place, even in Florida College, where he's going to school, and that may be extended and see what happens. But we look at that, and there's a blessing in that, and there's blessings that we can be together. But I want us to think about, and again, Tim gave a lot of great points in his invitation this past Wednesday night. But what I want us to really just consider is that conclusion that Jesus makes at the end of that section. And this is right, of course, in the Sermon on the Mount, when he says to the audience, to his disciples, therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And I thought, I'll tell you what, every time I read that passage, and we have various translations that put it in various ways, but every time I read that passage, I just kind of go, amen. Every day has enough trouble of its own, a couple of translations say. And we agree to that. We see that, don't we? Sufficient. And so I thought about this, that sufficient stress every day. There is sufficient stress every day. I'll tell you one thing we don't need is more stress in our lives. We're always looking for less stress in our lives. Even in normal years, when you don't have COVID-19 or when you don't have these kinds of things, or even just the kind of the hectic nature of a presidential election, and just that also brings the worst out of people. But besides those special things, don't we have enough stress because of the daily issues of life, because of our job, because of work, because of finances, because of just regular health problems and many other issues that come up in our lives? Sufficient stress every day. We get that. But then here's Jesus looking at people, and you talk about the disciples, that what they were facing then and going to face even more so was incredible persecution, affliction, tribulation. And why? Because they're believing the right things, they're doing the right things as disciples of Christ, and they would even be punished for it. Do you think that in the New Testament days, that when it came to being a disciple of Jesus Christ, that when you stood for your faith as you should, do you suppose that may have had some negative implications when it came to their jobs, their work, their finances, their relationships or standing in community? We know that it did. And it affected all of their lives. And you talk about affecting their health. How about just being taken and putting in prison, and some that were executed because they were Christians? That's stressful, to be sitting in a prison. Because why? Because you've done the right thing. And Jesus is saying, don't be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. So in that sense, while we're to prepare for the future, but that's heaven, and not to get hung up on the past and dwell so much in the past that it prevents us from going forward, here is Jesus saying, take care of right now, today. Do the very best of what you can do right now. When tomorrow comes, deal with it. And when the next day comes, deal with it. But don't be anxious. And then I thought, well, he uses a couple of interesting words here. And in most of the translations where you have either anxious or worry, he uses this word, merimnao. And it is a word that's used a good handful of times within the Greek text. But it is. It's basically a verb that has this idea to have anxiety. We know it is anxiousness, to have anxiety. But even as Gingrich says in his lexicon, that it is to be concerned, but unduly concerned. We have a lot of concerns. We ought to be concerned for one another. Concerned about the issues that are at hand. Nothing wrong with that. But to become unduly concerned, where now that it affects our faith, and now that it affects the way that we live on a daily basis as Christians, that's a kind of anxiety that is very negative and very wrong, and that Jesus is saying, don't do that. Even in the face of troublesome times, don't allow that to become an anxiety and anxiousness that is going to cause you to become bitter and negative and cynical and skeptical about God and His plan. Is thinking, what's happening? God, aren't you in control? God, fix this. Would we like God to somehow just reach down and fix the COVID-19 problem? Well, then let's pray about it more, I guess. I've been telling you right now that as the messages I've been giving to people is that in reference to all this going on, because of how this can impact our congregation, it can impact the lives of people. There are some, I was talking to one of our members today, and in Kimberly, as a matter of fact, and sitting in the back there, and her job may be on the line. She's going to find out this week. I got a text message from Sharon Ross this afternoon. And now we're going to find out about what's happening with, where she works at a doctor's, an acupuncturist actually, and now they're going to see if they're going to close for a while. Now we can pray for COVID-19 and cures and all that, and that's good. Let's be prayer warriors for that. But I'll tell you what, we do need to be concerned about one another. But let's not become so unduly concerned, this anxiousness, that again, we're just going to go around and just like such negativity that everything's just falling apart. You know what? We did not see that in the example of Jesus, His disciples, the early Christians. when they faced very, very tough circumstances. Almost unimaginable. Unimaginable. Then he talks about trouble. And kakia, this is really an interesting word because this many times, and this is found a whole lot more times than maranam. And usually it's just simply translated as evil. And sometimes it's just used in reference to the existent evil, the influences of the devil, evil. And so we would see that Barclay Newman in their lexicon say it's wickedness, hateful feelings, it can be trouble, worry, it's associated with worrisome things. But here's Jesus saying to disciples, therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. And so the anxious word is used twice, and then he says, sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And yes, he says, there is enough evil every day, but we just have to deal with that on a daily basis. Now, so I thought what I want to do with this, and I'm going to go through some of this very quickly. I just want us to see that as I thought about this in dealing with this stress, sufficient for the day is its own trouble in these very stressful situations, that I looked at this, there's always there's a cause, and there is a basic cause for stress that Jesus deals with. And then there are common effects of stress that can be problematic. And then, of course, what we really want to always appreciate and to incorporate into our lives is the desired cure. When we feel stress, and nobody wants to just be feeling stressful, we want it to get better, don't we? We really do. Now, there's an interesting thing that as we're going to look at this first point of stress, a basic cause, and there's several causes, and like temptation, I was thinking about this the other day because we so often refer to 1 Corinthians 10:13 that temptation is common to who? All men, all people. That's what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10:13. That all temptation is common to men. But is God faithful and just to help us with that? He is. He will not allow us to be tempted above what we're able to handle. He'll always provide the way of escape. And I was kind of pondering that, and I thought, as much as temptation is common to all, I want to suggest to you that stress is common to all too. And it may be in a variety of levels or degrees. But, I tell you, there's all types of stress and stress. I love to preach. I love the whole part of it. I love the preparation. I love putting sermon outlines together. I love it. I love it when it comes to the day to deliver. I really do. But don't think for a moment that there are not moments, and there really are every time these moments. We're sitting and we're singing that last song and getting ready, and then I thought, and all of a sudden it's going through. Okay, well, how's this going to go? How's this going to go? How's this going to go tonight? How's Brian going to do if there's a reading? But anyway, that's another issue. But stress, everybody has stress. Dennis Ross and his legs are just killing me. He's been having so much problem with that. They're not here tonight, and they're so faithful and so good. And when he's preaching this, he's preaching. And I said, Dennis, how you doing? He's preaching. He says, I'll be better when it's over. He tells me that every time. I'll be better when it's over with. Okay? You have stress in your jobs. You have stress in your lives. We get that. It's common. Psalm 34:19, there the psalmist says, many are the afflictions of the righteous. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. But the Lord delivers him out of them all. In the 119th Psalm, David the psalmist in Psalm 119 and verse 107 says, I am severely afflicted. Give me life, O Lord, according to your word. David had stress in his life, a lot, and had learned to deal with it. But then I thought about this, a basic cause. And while it's not peculiar to Matthew, Matthew is the gospel that indeed does include the 4 times that Jesus employs a very unique word. In fact, he's the only one that employs the word in the New Testament, Scripture. And you'll find it in some of the parallels of Mark and Luke as well. But it's the expression little faith. The Greek word agliopistos. Agliopistos. Little faith. And we see that he has to deal with this little faith issue. In our text of Matthew chapter 6, which was just read for us, Jesus shows that the connection, stress its connection, of course, is with anxiety when people start worrying about things like, what am I going to wear? Where am I going to live? What am I going to eat? Basically, what that means is, how am I going to survive during tough times? And Jesus gives some analogies there by saying, listen, I want you to consider the lily of the fields. The lily of the fields. You might hear that expression. I think of the movie with Sidney Poitier, Lily of the Fields. But he says they don't sow, they don't spin, they don't toil. They just, and look how beautiful they are. The birds of the heavens. God takes care of these things. And he says, he'll take care. And he connects it to this because in verse 30, but if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? He did not say that they had no faith. He did not say in this that, what's wrong with you? You've just abandoned your faith. No, it's a little faith issue. And you know what? All of us can experience that in our lives from time to time because of life's issues. And Jesus is saying, be careful with that. Because that anxiety can grab you and start controlling you when we need to allow God's ways, His will, His word, those influences to control us. We know that it has a connection to fear. There in Matthew chapter 8, and when you look at that situation in Matthew chapter 8, why were they afraid? I love this because here you have this situation in Matthew 8, and Jesus gets into the boat, and the disciples follow him, and behold, there arises this great storm, and they're on the boat, and the boat it's being swamped, it says, the ESV, by waves. But what's Jesus doing? Down below asleep. And they went and woke him, saying, save us, Lord, we're perishing. And he said, why are you afraid, O you of little faith? And then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men, they marveled, saying, what sort of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? I tell you, we still serve that Lord. But what I want us to see in this is there are a lot of things that maybe we're afraid of. And I know that we have our fears, our phobias. I'm not so much talking about that, but things that we are afraid of in this life. And we just got to remember that that can be a faith issue, that we allow that anxiety to control us in such a way that we stop trusting in God, remembering that God can deliver us, and He might. Maybe He won't. But are we going to be blessed in the end? Without question. Do we believe that? Do we believe that? And these are His disciples He's talking to, by the way. These men would be given great responsibility. You just flip on over to chapter 14 in Matthew, and here's the celebrated situation, another situation out on the water, but the disciples are in the boat. Jesus is not with them. Early in the morning, I could just imagine it was very misty, foggy almost on the water, and they see what appears to be an apparition, some kind of a ghost walking towards them. As Jesus, they finally recognize that He's walking the water. That got their attention. And Peter's immediate response, Lord, let me come in. Can I come out? Can I? And He says, come on. And He's doing it. That's what gets me, is He's doing it. Peter's walking on the water. Somebody says, Jesus is the only one who ever walked on water. No, Peter walked on water. He did. But as he took his focus off, and now he begins to doubt what he's doing, he begins to sink, and Lord, save me, and the Lord saves him. And by the way, if you ever thought about that, the Lord just didn't pick him up and throw him on the boat. No, He saved him. And I don't know if he walked his hand as they're walking back on the water of the boat. You ever thought about that? But Jesus said, why did you doubt? I want to tell you, brethren, that that's a problem. That's a cause, a basic cause. A stress that when we start doubting the Lord, start doubting God, start doubting the truth, start doubting His plan and our part in it. And it's even found in its connection with human reasoning. In fact, if you just turn over a couple of pages there in Matthew chapter 16, and Jesus is dealing with the scribes and with the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And we would notice this in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 8. And verse 5, when the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. And Jesus said, watch and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. That is, watch out for the leaven, their influence. You see that? But they began discussing, and in fact, one of the translations says, they began reasoning among themselves. Look at that in verse 7. They began discussing or reasoning among themselves, saying, is it we brought no bread? But Jesus, aware of this, said, O you of little faith, why are you reasoning or discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive? Don't you see? Don't you understand? Do you not remember the 5 loaves or the 5,000, how many baskets you gathered? You know, don't worry about physical bread. Jesus, I have the ability to take care of that. But the thing that really stood out to me, how many times does the Lord say something, the Lord want us to do something, He shows us His plan, and then all of a sudden this human reasoning comes in and we start to doubt there too. I mean, well, no, you know what? Can this really work, Lord? And then we stress over it. Do you see the point I'm trying to make? It happens all the time. Okay. So we see that it's basic cause. And it's something that is connected to our anxiety, to our fears, our doubts, and so often human reason. And the Lord wants us to have faith and appeal to Him. So then I thought about that when we talk about stress and then its common effects. So this being the case, and we always have this cause and effect. So we see a common cause, and now there's an effect. And I just want to say, in reference to this, these 3 points, sub-points, that, and I'll ask you, can stress affect the physical body? Oh, we know it can. Can stress, and does stress, obviously, this is axiomatic, but does it affect the inner person? Well, of course it does. And can stress affect just the way a person, it's kind of the physical thing too, but their countenance, just the way they look? Does anybody ever come walking in the building and you go up to them and you have a smile and you, back when we could shake each other's hands. And you go up and you greet them and so forth, you know, and you say, good morning, good to see you. And they just look at you and they got, you know, their countenance is falling. And I'll tell you, something's going on. And just less they're that way all the time. Bless their hearts. Stress has these common effects. You talk about affecting the body to that point, by the way, and there's several Psalms that deal with this in the Proverbs as well, and I just picked out a couple. But in Psalm 22 and verse 14, David, who's dealing with he's dealing because he had a lot of stress in his life, and a lot of the stress was brought about by his own guilt of sin. Okay? And he says, I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint, and my heart is like wax. It is melted within my breast. There are times and situations that's what stress can do. Now again, this had a lot to do because of sin and bad choices, and we've been there. And we talk about a heaviness of heart. That's what David was experiencing. And you know what? We don't like it. In fact, sometimes we say, what's wrong? I just don't feel good today. And it's not that we've got really a bug. Not that we have a cold. We may not even have a headache per se, but we just don't feel good because life is weighting us down, and there's these physical effects accordingly. The wise man Solomon says, though, in Proverbs 17 and verse 22, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Well, you talk about good medicine. I'm working on another sermon right now. I was in a class and somebody said something. I go, I'm preaching on this. Because somebody said, oh, well, Christianity, the church is just a crutch. I said, of course it is. Of course it's a crutch. Because we need crutches. You know why? Because we're maimed. Oh, the church is just that. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to talk about being a hospital with a lot of sick people. I tell you what, I think we're a middle ward half the time. Somebody said, oh, the church is a crutch. Well, thank you, Lord, because I need a crutch to help me. That's another lesson I won't preach it right now. But I'm just saying that how we are affected by this. And you talk about good medicine. And because it does the inner person. And then I thought about Jesus. I want you to look at this very quickly. Over in Luke chapter 6, Luke chapter 6, verse 11. In Luke chapter 6 and verse 11, understand that in the verses that precede that, what has happened is Jesus is being challenged by some, and there are those that they want to do him harm. Now, he's just healed a man with a withered hand, and he does it on the Sabbath, and he always takes criticism for that. And you look at this, and after he does this, I want you to notice in verse 10, Luke 6, verse 10, and after looking around at them all, he said, stretch out your hand, and he did so, and his hand was restored. There's the miracle, right? But look at verse 11. But they, so you're talking about these scribes and Pharisees, but they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. They're plotting and planning. They want to grab him. They want him dead. And Jesus knows this. So then you go to the next section, next verse, and it says, in these days, and we know what Jesus is dealing with. He has enemies on all sides. And in these days, verse 12, he went out to the mountains to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. I want to suggest to you, because even the verses that follow, what does he do that day? He gets up, and he goes out, and he prays all night, and then the next day, what is he going to do the very next day? Who's he going to choose the very next day? His apostles. Which tells me this important message. When you have important things that need to be done, and decisions to make, like choosing these men that were going to be given an incredible position and responsibility, Jesus said you pray about it. He spent the whole night in prayer. But you suppose that he's praying because you have people on this side, the scribes and Pharisees and other enemies, that want him dead. You have people on this side who want to be his disciples, but we've just been reading that they're people sometimes filled with fear and doubt and anxiety. And he says, I'm going to choose these fellows to this important work. And he prays all night. Just really hits me that way. Stress has its common effects. It affects the body, affects the inner person, the mind. And even Jesus knew how many times that what Jesus would do, he'd pray about it. He'd get up all this early in the morning, still dark, long before anybody else, and he'd pray. Spend the night in prayer. He prayed, because he knew that his inner person needed that. And then you talk about this point before we go to our final point, close. The countenance. Stress can do that. You know, the first time we probably see that really in this way, and the wording that is used, is in reference to Cain, after he has killed his brother. Well, actually, even before that, he hasn't killed his brother in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 6. But God accepts Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's, and is Cain disappointed? And so what's the question? What's the why? Cain, why has your countenance fallen? Why are you angry? Yes, he says, why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? Somebody could read that and hear that. I think of that old silly joke about the horse that walks into, we'll just say, into some establishment. And the person that works at that establishment says to the horse, why such a long face? But anyway, I can't read that. Why was your face fallen? We see that happens, stress and its common effects. Well, it brings us to our final point. And there is this desire to cure. And this is just a short list, although I think it's an important list. And brethren, all I can say is that when we are filled and we're dealing with this stress and there's this anxiety and all of these issues that come about, you know what? First, I think one of the things that we need to do is, instead of concentrating so much on our own world, our own life, take time and help others. That's good medicine. And I thought about that passage that we often quote in Acts 20, where Jesus says, more blessed to give than receive. But when you look at the context, there, in all things, Paul says, I've shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord, how he himself said it is more blessed to give than to receive. And that might be helping people out financially. But how about helping? There are just times that people that are weak in faith, or because they're weak because of physical ailment or other problems in life. And you know what we can do? We can help them by giving. And we give time, and we give energy, and we give ourselves. And I want to tell you, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So take the time to help others. Number 2, how about we count our blessings? We sing the song, count your blessings, name them one by one. I love that statement of David in the 116th Psalm in verse 12. And as he's speaking to the faithful Israel, and he wants them to understand, but he asks the question, what shall I render unto the Lord for all of his benefits towards me? First of all, what can we even possibly give back to the Lord? It's very meager at best. But what should I render, Lord, for all of his benefits? God blesses us so much. One of the ways that we can really deal with stress and cure is by counting our blessings every day. Praise God for that. 3, yes, we need to prayerfully meditate. That should be a given for us as Christians. What does Paul say? You know this passage in Philippians 4:4. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. Let your reasonableness, let your moderation be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. And he says, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known to God, and the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And then he even told us the good things to think on, to meditate. Prayerful meditation is going to help with stress. And unless we become victims like David, but he victimized himself for a while. One of the reasons that we have stress again is going back to guilt or failure on our own part and not dealing with it appropriately. And so I'll tell you what will help with that stress factor is that's called repentance and spiritual restoration. And David finally came to that realization. One of my favorite Psalms of David is a psalm of remorse. It's sad in some ways, but yet it also gives such a message of hope as well in the 51st Psalm. In verse 7 he says, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Let me bear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. He's reaching out to God. He knows he needs to change. He knows he needs to repent. This was a psalm of remorse because of his adultery with Bathsheba and having her husband killed. That's heavy. Verse 10, create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not from your presence. Take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and uphold me with a willing spirit. I'll tell you what, sometimes we just need to repent, change, and do the right thing. And then finally, in all of this, trust God's promises. Trust his promises. God is faithful. How many times do we see that expression in Scripture? God is faithful. He's dependable, trustworthy. You can count on him. That first phrase that's found in 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, well, I have 9a on it, but the Lord is not slow or slack concerning his promises, as some men count slowness or slackness. We may fail in our promises from time to time to our family, our spouses, our children, and to our brethren, and sometimes we do, but God never does. And then I thought about that beautiful, beautiful statement of Isaiah, one of the favorite passages, especially for athletes, runners, long-distance runners, is the whole Isaiah 40:31. We'll get there. But listen, verse 28, have you not known, have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. You know, God doesn't get tired. He doesn't wear out. He doesn't forget. He gives power to the faint, and him who has no might, he increases strength. Even you shall faint and be weary. I think about that. Sometimes, and he's sleeping right now. I think about, no, yes, just like, as soon as I said that, he opened his eyes. Brent, pay attention. Now, but I look at that and I think, because Grant is one that typically, historically, Quinn, he never liked to even take naps. He doesn't take naps. And I look at this kid, I said, this kid is a boundless source of energy. But there are times when finally, all of a sudden, but I think when he hit the pillow at night, he goes out. But he says, even youth shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exalted. But look at verse 31. But they who wait for the Lord, that requires patience, shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. How much we would like to have that. We've got to trust God's promises, and that will happen. Well, there's a basic cause, and there are common effects. And the desired cure God's given to us, he's outlined it for us in his word. And life is not stress-free. It's just not, never will be. And I hope we get through this year okay. But you want to know something? If we don't, the bottom falls out, however you want to call it, we'll be faithful to God. And we'll rejoice on the other side. I believe that with all my heart. God is greater than our stress. If we can help anybody tonight, there's still water in the baptistry, by the way. Yes, there is. Ooh, heat coming out too. But if there's anyone that is ready to be baptized, to obey the gospel, you know what to do. We extend that invitation, whatever the need may be. Won't you come at this time? Let it be known as we stand to sing the song that has been sung.